In September of 2017, Chad and Jared Moldenhauer finished and released their passion project Cuphead, a game that would take the indie and gaming world by storm and cement itself as one of the best indies of all time. 4 years after the game's release, the greatest of Cuphead players arrived and lifted his controller the same way King Arthur lifted Excalibur from the stone. And that player is me. Dang! Cuphead is the first game I ever brought for myself. Since buying it in 2021, I have 300% the game and S-ranked every boss on expert mode multiple times. So unlike IGN, I'm qualified to give this game a rating. But ladies and gentlemen, my rating system is like one you have never seen before. Whenever I rate a game on this channel, I use my own rating system where I rate 5 key elements of the game on a scale of 1 to 10. After giving all 5 elements their respective rating, we will average them out to create our Cuphead rating. So Cuphead won't lose points for having too much water, and won't lose points because we don't have a playable honey bottle as a diversity character. No. The key elements will be things that a player can reasonably assume the developer intended to be a key selling point for their game, alongside fundamental game mechanics that actually make the game playable. For now, I will determine these 5 key elements myself. But if by some miracle, someone other than my alternate account watches this video, I will make a community post for you guys to have a say in what elements I should review for a game. Now at this point, I spent enough time explaining. So here are the 5 key elements I will rate Cuphead on. Because Cuphead's main selling point is its nostalgic 1950s cartoon art style, we will rate Cuphead's art and game sound. Because Cuphead is a boss rush game, we will rate their boss design. Because Cuphead is a weapons-based fighting game, we will rate their weapon design. And I was iffy about adding this one because you don't think of this for the most part when you think of Cuphead. But if this wasn't executed well, it would drastically lower the quality of the game. And that's level design. And then there's the 6th element that every game I review will be rated on, because this is a basic necessity of every game in existence. Playability. This refers to things like lag tendency and whether there are any game-breaking glitches or not. Now, the time for talk is over. Let's get at it. First is art. And ladies and gentlemen, the art in this game is nothing short of amazing. The first time I saw the Cuphead art style before I even knew what the game was, their masterful use of watercolors really made me believe it was some old game that came out around the time of the OG Looney Tunes. Not even considering that tech like that didn't exist for video games yet. And then there's the attention to detail. Just look at these boss backgrounds. Most players will never notice any of this. They'll still be too busy sending their controllers to orbit after not noticing a jelly bean. MDHR still put 110% effort into these backgrounds, regardless of that fact. This alone is enough to put the art between an 8.5 to 9 for me. But the character animations seal the deal. The way the characters move might be more perfect for this game's aesthetic than peanut butter is for jelly. Look at the way the devil jumps out of his skin in the boss fight, or the fear animation during final boss fights, or Esther Winchester's reaction to being turned into a sausage, among many other animations in this game, long or short. Yeah, the art in this game is getting a 10 out of 10 for me. Because if anyone were to make a game with the same aesthetic, the best they could do is match what Cuphead has done. There's no surpassing this. Next up, we have music. And from my completely unbiased experience as a man who has played an instrument since 4th grade, Cuphead has one of the best soundtracks in gaming. Now, the majority of games have a good soundtrack in 2024. It's a near necessity to have a good soundtrack at this point. But Cuphead's soundtrack is different than most because each piece is as thematic as it can be for each boss without deviating from the jazz roots. Look at how they nailed boss themes like Pyramid Peril. You wouldn't expect a genie in jazz to work this smoothly. What about the creativity of Railroad Raft, where they use horns to imitate the sound of a train? And don't even get me started on tracks like Bootlegger Boogie and High C Hydrants. You can throw any song from Cuphead into the playlist of your grandpa from the 1950s, and you'll have him dancing the same way he did back in the day when they didn't let my grandpa into the bar he was bopping in. And then there's the SFX. I love how they lower the quality of the mic in places where they're speaking to imitate the way the mic sounded back then.
Thank you. Welcome.
I come to make an announcement.
And the sound effects they use just scream early cartoons to the point that I can almost guarantee you can substitute an old cartoon's SFX with Cuphead's and no one would bat an eye. I would do it myself to prove my point. But as you can tell from this video, I'm not yet good enough with editing to pull off something like that. The Cuphead audio gets a 9.3 out of 10, since the soundtrack has been in my head for like 3 years now, and the SFX is again perfect for the old cartoon aesthetic. But the reason I'm not gonna give it a 10 is because I'm only going to give it a 10 if I can never see another game doing any better in that respective category. Now here's when things get a little interesting, because let's talk weapons. Cuphead has some creative weapons and good weapon balance. Hard Shot has the highest DPS in the game, balanced behind the fact that there's no medium charge. Red Shot does some crazy damage, balanced by the fact that all 8 pellets have to hit to do said crazy damage. Lava releases slowly and only has 2 bounces before dissolving. Roundabout and Crack Shot have insane range, balanced by their average to slightly above average damage. But then here's where the problem starts. Because the player has no incentive to use any weapon other than these, because you can get any weapon at any point in the game. As a result, there's no such thing as early and late game weapons, leading pretty much any weapon that isn't one of these 5 to be effectively useless. Why use Chase if you can use Crack Shot, which does more damage? Why use Converge if Spread and Charge Shot let me move while maximizing damage? Why use Twist Up at all? What's more, even of the actually good weapons, a player would usually choose either 2 or 3 favorites and just stick with them. Lobber only really has usage because of bosses like Grim Matchstick, Rumor, Honeybottom. And other than that, most players will stick to 1 or 2 weapons to use for every boss. There isn't really an incentive to switch it up, and the problem is even worse with the super arts. When using Cuphead, you're probably only gonna use Super 1, and maybe some Super 2, but never Super 3. Chalice kinda solves this problem, with 1 and 3 being interchangeable depending on matchup, and 2 having a reasonable incentive to use, but with the base weapons, she still has the same problem. Plain weapons you locked into 2 shots in a super, you don't have a choice. So at that point, it's whether you prefer using a charm or chalice. So we're stuck with a top-heavy weapon system with no incentive to switch things up after you choose your 2 to 3 weapons. But because the top weapons have a good variety and balance, while some weapons like the Convergent Chaser aren't completely outclassed, but have some minor advantages over the superior weapons, I'll give Cuphead a 7 in weapons. And now for the penultimate category, level design. The run and gun stages in Cuphead are only really there to get coins to buy stuff from Perk Grind's shop, so as a result, not as much effort was needed to be put into this as was needed for stuff like bosses. But MDHR clearly did not like cutting corners, because they went all in with these levels. There are 6 run and guns in the entire game, and each are distinct from one another. You never know what you're going to encounter in a level till you actually enter it. So I give them additional points for giving the player a slight hint of what they might encounter by theming the run and gun stages with where you are standing outside on the map, and loosely with the bosses you might fight in that part of the isle. Forest Follies takes place in the same forest you fight Goopy Legrand, and it's difficult because of the constant onslaught of forest creatures targeting you. Treetop Troubles might be in the tree behind Cavity Carnation's boss fight, so there's obviously no way to confirm. Funfair Fever is either outside Beppy Circus or on the ground below Wally Warble's nest, and gave me trouble because of the claustrophobic jumps you have to make, plus that stupid flying magician. Funhouse Frazzle has to be in Beppy Circus, and is difficult due to the special card mechanic that's unique to the level. Peerless Piers has to be in the same dock you fight Briny Beard, and it's difficult because of the lobster that follows you and the octopus part. Rugged Ridge, I'm guessing, is on the way to the junkyard where you fight Dr. Kel's robot, and it's difficult because of the platforming. And while almost everything I said can't be proven as fact, notice the speculations about the world surrounding Cuphead you can make solely from how the run and gun stages were created and executed. The player can reasonably imagine the run and guns to be a glimpse into the adventures Cuphead and Bugman take to get from boss to boss, and that allows us to become more immersed into the world despite Cuphead not being a story-oriented game. But if the run and guns were intended to be the side adventures of Cuphead and Mugman, they definitely feel like it. They're all short, and it seems like MDHR found a level concept that works and just stuck with it without going in depth into said idea. So because the levels are good, but left to me wanting more from them, I'm giving the run and guns an 8. Now for the secret 6th category, playability. Most of Cuphead glitches that existed have been removed from the game, but one I still encounter sometimes is the King Dice glitch where the cards just don't spawn. I've seen this glitch occur with other people as well, so it's not just me. This is a very bad glitch to have, because to my knowledge, there's no way to intentionally trigger this glitch. It'll just happen randomly. And King Dice is one of the most important bosses of the game, so a major glitch like that during his fight is inexcusable. I'm not gonna mention any speedrun glitches, cause it's literally their job to break games to their core. But this King Dice glitch is so major, I'm gonna bring down Cuphead's playability to a 7.5. A glitch like that on a boss like King Dice completely ruins one of the most important bosses in the game. You'll come to notice that I'm gonna be real strict with playability during these rankings, because too many companies are comfortable releasing buggy games. And finally, the category we've all been waiting for, the bosses. And I'm gonna spoil this ranking early, cause ladies and gentlemen, Cuphead is inarguably a top 5 boss cast and can be argued to be in any of those 5 spots. Cuphead is a 10 for boss design, and I'ma spend the rest of this segment explaining why. Before the DLC's release, if you were to ask 10 Cuphead players what the hardest boss in the game was, you would probably get 10 different answers. For many people, the hardest boss was King Dice because of the variety in enemies they have to face along the way, along with it being a drawn out fight. For many it was Grim Matchstick, partly because they rely on auto-aiming weapons that lock onto his attacks in the last phase. For many it was Dr. Cow because of his confusing first phase and overwhelming offense. And for me, it was the Jimmy the Great because he has too many phases and man, I just hate that boss. I think the cause of this diversity all has to do with the personality of the bosses. Think back to when you played Cuphead for the first time, and you'll realize the most difficult parts of the boss battles were things that only made sense with the theme of the boss fight. Hildeberg's stars and UFOs only make sense because she's an aviation-based witch uses the stars and zodiac signs as spells. Tiny Carnation's bullet seeds because he's a flower. Grim Matchstick's Hydra phase because he's a dragon. Hella Maria's Stonebeam because she's Medusa. Ribbon Croak's slot machine seems to be random at first, but the boss fight takes place in a clip joint. A place where it wouldn't be surprising to find a slot machine that you'd probably be getting scammed if you use one there. That and the symbols on the slot machines, like almost everything else in the fight, are Street Fighter references. The bull for M. Bison, the tiger for Sagat, the snake for Vega, and the chips surrounded by spikes for Chun-Li. And perhaps the key reason why there isn't a standalone most difficult boss is because every boss in the game is fair. The most infuriating part of Cuphead is that whenever you lose, you can only blame it on yourself, because the bosses never cheese you. The boss will do pretty much the same thing every single time. None of them really break the rules of the game with some special gimmick. You just suck, and you know that. So you get mad at yourself because there ain't nothing else to get mad at. But ladies and gentlemen, that's pre-DLC we talking about. Because after the DLC came out, things changed. Pre-DLC, I may have given the bosses a good 8.5 to 9. But playing those first 5 DLC bosses, man, that brought it up to a 9 to 9.5. But then, I faced him, the boss of all bosses, Salt Baker. Salt Baker is the dictionary definition of the perfect final boss, while still being just as fair as every other boss in the game. Each one of his attack patterns alone aren't exactly easy to dodge, but the fact that he chains them together makes Salt Baker's first phase probably the hardest first phase among all bosses in all games. Look at his eyes. He's deranged. Look at the way he attacks. He murders the ingredients in cold blood with laughter. He doesn't care what it takes. He will get to the astral plane and he will kill you to do it. He's psychotic. And he's evil. His boss fight clearly stands above all others in terms of atmosphere and difficulty. He's perfect. With Salt Baker rounding out this cast of bosses, how are you supposed to give it anything but a 10? The only games that can match this cast of bosses is From Software's Soul games. And they're a company that has mastered the boss formula. For Cuphead to be standing in such special company, anything less than a 10 post DLC is just straight up dishonest. Now that you've seen my ranking system in practice, you'll come to notice that it's going to be extremely difficult for gaming to get above an 8 with this scale, and that's on purpose. My goal is to separate the good from the great. I'm not doing this on my own. I'm going to create a video game hall of fame, where any game that gets an 8.5 or above is eligible to be voted in. So once a year, I'll have a community tournament where you guys will vote for which 5 out of all our eligible games will be inducted into the Video Game Hall of Fame. I can't wait to have more of you guys watching my videos so we can create video game history together. Now, without further ado, let's get ranking. With a 10 in art, a 9.3 in music, a 7 in weapons, an 8 in level design, and a 7.5 of playability, and a 10 in bosses, I'm giving Cuphead, probably my favorite game of all time, an 8.6 out of 10. That's right, my favorite game doesn't even get a 9. I wish someone would try to cry favoritism in the comments. The two categories bringing Cuphead down are the weapons and playability. A King Dice glitch is inexcusable. I don't think I can in good faith give a game even an 8 in playability when one of the most important bosses in the game, a character who appears since the first cutscene and a character who makes more appearances than the devil himself, can have his biggest moment in the game ruined by, ironically enough, a random roll of the dice. Especially because Cuphead came out around 7 years ago and the glitch still exists to this day. And as for weapons, funny enough, the score is dragged down because of the DLC ones. Crackshot is just a better chaser, thus giving the player no reason to use an original weapon which had a much fairer drawback for its perfect aim. Crackshot can miss, but that's only on a select few bosses like the last phase of Saltbaker, and the second aim shot still does way more damage than Chaser. The other DLC weapons are either effectively useless or already had a weapon that does similar damage with what I would say is a better drawback. If the DLC weapons weren't there, the problem of a player having no incentive to switch weapons would still be a thing, but it wouldn't be as big of a problem, and I would probably give Cuphead an 8.5 for weapons. If it weren't for these problems, Cuphead would have a rating between an 8.9 and a 9.3. But unless these problems are fixed, I don't see my Cuphead rating changing anytime soon.